So it is awesome to have you here. I mean, you are my brother, of course.
Yes, sir.
And I hope you're not upset. I always bring people to see you.
Absolutely.
If there's somebody who touches me a little bit,
Yeah.
I'll bring them over.
Absolutely.
I'll say you have to meet my doc. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Like, you brought your doctor with you? I said, yeah. You got him with me all the time, whenever I need him. So,
And that was a very nice friend you had last night. I saw.
Kim was wonderful.
Yeah.
She's a good person.
That's
and
good.
and we, a lot of people, and you were talking to a lot of people, and then you rode out of there on your bikes and went down down the Sweeney Toad, as Scotty would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that I think it's a combination of being older and trying to be healthier. I'm going to sleep a little more earlier, and it really does make a difference, especially when I have a clinical day next day. I can think more clearly. It helps a lot. So
Right.
Yeah.
So our main theme has always been, of course, the I call it the thing.
Talk about COVID?
That happened to us. Yes, the thing that happened to us, and it's taken out numerous friends
Yeah.
that we've known and loved.
Yeah.
But where do you see today, in your practice and what you're seeing now? What do you see? I know we did a little predicting before. We were pretty right on.
Yeah.
What do you see?
It's been interesting. There's been a lot more information being shared. What's and unwilling by the CDC or the government or the armed forces, but it's been shared, and it really shows us kind of the direction that the vaccines have taken us, as well as the disease. And those are really two different pathways, which is pretty interesting. General over things that I'm seeing is that those who have 3 is the magic number. If you've only had 2 shots, or if you only just did the J&J, you're pretty well off. Still recommending vitamin C daily, just to try to help your own immune system differentiate between what's real RNA and what's not real, or viral-induced RNA. But I am noticing that those who only received the 2 shots are not getting the same illnesses as those who've gotten 3+. So 3 appears to be the magic number. And what I mean by that is that there's a significant percentage, whether it be 10% or 15%, or some people suggest 40%, who become ill because of that. And that illness can manifest itself as frequent sinus infections or throat infections, which we're seeing. The line I hear all the time is, I never was sick before, now I'm sick all the time. They're all responding to antibiotics, and everybody's responding to prednisone when appropriate, and that's good, and they feel better, but then 2 months later, they're sick again. And it's a very frustrating pattern, particularly if you're used to being well. And then the more serious caveats, of course, we've heard about the myocarditis, we've heard about the sudden death syndromes. Currently, the leading cause of death still in Canada is sudden death. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I hear everything, and I try not to internalize everything and say I believe because I read one thing.
Right.
So
now,
and we'll do a disclaimer here. The doc and I, neither one of us are giving medical opinions. It is our opinions as people, and I'm just going from your experience, what you saw.
Right.
You're not going to give. We're not giving medical advice here because we're not doing that.
So I am obviously a physician, so I do think of things as medically,
Right.
And so what I'm giving you isn't necessarily advice. I'm giving you information.
Right. Exactly.
What you choose to do with that information,
Exactly.
but it is based on medicine. It's
Right.
not just opinion.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Well, I understand
yeah.
you're educated, but
Right. No, I know, but I mean,
And you have
like in my
experience.
practice, if you're
Right.
in my practice, then I'm going to say, hey, take DC zinc, take this medicine, take this, maybe avoid this, those type of things.
Right.
So that's not what we're doing today.
Right.
So Canada, their news media has really taken off on this. If you look up Sudden Death Canada, you'll see all the news articles.
Oh, really? I'm going to have to do that.
It's pretty interesting. It was not scary. But so those are significant. So I don't know whether that's going to be 5% of those who got 3 or more vaccine shots or higher. I really don't know the numbers. We know that millions and millions have received it, right?
Right.
Hundreds of millions. So we're looking at a lower percentage rate. And then there can be a caveat. Okay, well, there's always an acceptable risk. And that's the question that remains unopened or unanswered. And that is, are we still in that acceptable range or not? So what is acceptable? Classically, it's 3%. So if you have less than 3% complication, and ideally 1.1, obviously the lower the better. But if you have less than 3% complication, then it's a medication or a therapy that you can recommend. If it's over 3%, 3 to 10%, or 3 to 8%, and there's some debate about that in medical ethics, then you have to get consent, and you have to make sure everybody's aware of what could happen here. And that's very common. For example, the statins for
Right.
cholesterol control. That's higher than 10%. You get the muscle aches. I think it's 12%. So we all talk about it. So this is a very common practice we do every day, and a lot of medicines we use do have that kind of adverse number, but we just are aware of it, and we say, hey, be careful. The Cipro complication is 3%, with the tendons. So you got to tell people about it. So there are. This is where bias comes in, I think, and those who want to prove that the vaccines have caused injury will quote numbers of 25%, 30%. Those who want to disprove will quote numbers of 2% to 4%. My suspicion is somewhere between, but I argue that 15% is too much, or even 10% for something as experimental as it was and something that was required in many settings.
Right.
And a lot of people are now asking the question about accountability, and it's going to be a tough one because it was very, very clear. I felt from all sides that this is experimental, and this is currently being recommended. Okay, now it's not, but yet they do. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
The CDC and the FDA have now come out. Well, these may not be as helpful as we thought, but go ahead and get another booster. And that makes no sense to me.
Well, I had something interesting happen. A very close friend of mine took her fourth shot.
Okay.
And I think from her own description, she had taken two of, I think, Moderna, and then boosted with a Pfizer.
Mm-hmm.
She went down sick within 7 days, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they found out her immune system is basically gone.
Mm.
She has they did a test on what she's immune to. There's
Right.
two things out of all the things that she could be immune to. And now she's been in her house. We played a musical gig in New York.
Yeah.
And 7 days later, somewhere there, she got the shot. 7 days later, she hasn't been out of her house since.
Poor thing. Now, there was a recent article in, I can't quote it, it was featured in Epoch Times about some of the researchers discovering this this immunoglobulin is surging, which is causing immunosuppression. It's binding and not allowing the secretion of normal immune responses. It was just released last week, actually.
Oh, really?
So they are looking into, is there, so I think the question about is there immunosuppression has been answered yes. Okay, and I think I can't imagine anybody would disagree with that with the current data that's out there. What we don't know is how much and why are some people more affected than others. And again, that whole 2 or 3 shot thing is real. I have a patient now who was healthy, been sober for 5-6 years, and 4 months after the third shot got disseminated squamous cell carcinoma. So it's one of these things where it's like, and ultimately it'll be almost impossible to scientifically prove
Right.
that it's related. So unless you can prove that there's immunosuppression, unless you can prove that there's some type of removal of a defensive cancer, that our body naturally has,
Right.
you're not going to be able to prove the shot actually caused it. But you cannot deny mortality of 2021. You can't deny the upcoming mortality figures of 2022. These are reported by the government.
Right.
And they don't want to. And the increase is huge. And what's the difference? And it's not COVID.
And who's the winner?
Yeah.
Like well, you and I talked about it
Right.
on our last interview,
Right.
and it was they want you dead, and it's like, well, who are they, and why? I always say, even on my radio show, I say, if you think there's too many people in the world, well, then be my guest. Be the first to go. If you think, why should you say that, and then you get to stay, and someone else has to go? To me, that's not honest. It's not fair. It's not right.
So that's certainly a conversation going around about overpopulation, climate change, all these big topics that have been discussed since the 80s, as it turns out. I mean, and seeing some of these really well put together documentaries show how people have been talking about overpopulation and the need to control it, artificially or not, whether it be the World Health Organization or WEF. They're all talking about it. They have been talking about it. They've actually been quite open about it. Whether it's manifested and this is intentional or not, is yet to be proven. And it's true. It's quick to say, "Oh, they all want us dead," because it's a talking piece, right? That grabs your attention. The reality is that they want us, or the people who are in power currently, who are making multi-billion dollars, who the great families, the ones who run the Federal Reserve, these world leaders who are behind the, not shadows. There's no conference going on. It's just they just know what they want. They all want mutual things. When they see us, they want us to be happy, however we want to be happy. But we're gonna have to work for it every day, and every day, whatever part of we work for goes to them, ultimately. So it really is a form of slavery, and it's really a form of indentured servitude, if you want. It's something we've accepted. Think about it. I mean, we've accepted this. I accept the fact if I win the lottery, half of it goes to the government. It's just the way it is. Right. So that's a whole other philosophical conversation. But I think that this has been growing, and we're talking about it now, and we're having more venues to talk about it. Therefore, more people are saying, "Hey, there's a lot of truth to this." And now I think many of us are still like, "Well, there's nothing I can do about it." But now the question is, well, what can we do for our kids?
Right.
And what can we do for the future? So.
Yeah. Who? I always, a lot of times, I have my Dr. Lewisms all the time, and I'm like, well, our generation, I take responsibility for everything I've done with the state of my children, my everything. I had a hand in it.
Right.
I'm disappointed that we quickly look so inward and kind of to ourselves, rather than to look to the larger family, if you will.
Right.
And Dr. Lewis, we have a family.
Right.
You're a part of that family,
Thank you.
and when you come here, people that come here are part of that family,
Right.
and we try and build that by being good to each person individually. And when a person isn't being good to somebody, they can step out for a while, and doesn't mean they're gone, but it means that hey, they're not doing that.
I would even take it as, I think it's almost about respect. We can all have different opinions. We can all, and that's how I practice medicine, in the sense that I respect that you have an opinion and you get to make a decision. I ran into this. It's not a patient of mine. We were just talking at the club we were just at,
Right.
Not this past time, a couple weeks ago, and she was explaining about complications that she was having with the medicine. Specifically, she was on a very, very strong medicine for a autoimmune arthritis caused by lupus. And it's an IV medicine, and you give it to yourself daily. And it is caustic. It hurts kidneys, and it causes hearing loss, and it causes ringing in the ears, right? So she started this medication. Do you have to go?
I don't know who's coming in.
All right. So we started the medication. She started it, and sure enough, 2 months later, she started losing hearing, and she didn't understand why. Yeah. Were there any other questions you really wanted to ask me about what's going on currently?
The only it was interesting. Now I know I send you a number of things.
Yeah.
And they're not designed to sway you or
No.
anything.
I mean, most of the things I've read, which is interesting.
They seem significant.
Yeah.
There was one recently. There's a fellow named Steve Kirsch.
Okay.
He's on Substack,
Okay.
and I have him. Interestingly enough, he has this thing. It says new peer review.
Right.
And this is a study that's come out, and basically.
So again, you look at the number 200,000, right? Compared to 300 million, right? Or let's say even 200 million who got the shots, right? So what percentage is that? That's 1%. Okay. So the argument is, well, that's acceptable. Those 200,000 deaths are acceptable.
But then they have to demonstrate effectiveness, which they're struggling with.
They can't.
And we heard yesterday that somebody came in. I think it was my drummer Ron came in and said, "Oh well, the CDC is now saying that only 10% of the attributed deaths were directly for this. A lot of it was other stuff, which we kind of were saying."
Right.
And then one day I asked you, and you said, "Well, where did the flu go?"
Right. And now it's back. Now they're letting us test for it. That's the better way to phrase it.
Okay.
They didn't let us test for it during 2021 because they didn't want it to confound their narrative or their conversation about COVID. They wanted COVID to be this horrible disease. And of interest, people who have influenza A are far more sicker than those who have COVID or influenza B. And of the pneumonias I've diagnosed in the past 3 months, which is over 30, almost all of them initially were influenza A. So, and 2 of them were hospitalized. So it's it's one of those things where how many was influenza A
Right.
that we attributed to COVID, right?
Right. So
And those deaths also. I mean, how many of those deaths? They're saying directly from the vaccine, and that's a hard. The only ones you can say directly die from the vaccines are the ones that literally died after the vaccine within a week or two of sudden death.
Right.
And I think that number is accurate. I think it is about 200,000. So that's 1%. Is it acceptable? Well, according to medical ethics, it is. Yeah, but again, it's one of these things that it was required. I think once when they made it
were
required,
coerced. And then families,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
my just a couple of my loved ones were coerced into it by
Exactly.
their family.
So I think there's the distinction. That's when we cross the line as medical professionals, as government agencies, and and now I most of it's I think most of it is designed to be inflammatory because they always want us to be divided. They never want us to be together. So some of the newer hate statements, as I would qualify them, are, well, they knew this was going to happen to us. They should have been stronger about not letting us take the vaccine, or they knew we were going to have. And I think it's manufactured. I think it's being created by people who want to create conflict. When the reality is, most people who were considered anti-vaxxers, or at least had great concerns, like myself, for the vaccine because of the unknown nature of it, we are saddened. Now what do we do? Like I said, the vitamin C for my patients, but then what else can we do? And what can we do to try to hopefully allow the body to heal itself? Because the body is remarkable.
But my favorite candy, weekly candy, or is the eye drug, ivermectin.
Uh-huh.
And I found that to honestly be a miracle for so many things.
I've actually used ivermectin on 4 cases of influenza A when they couldn't get Tamiflu, and it worked almost just as well, if not better. Tamiflu is one of the few antivirals I still do like. And what some of you may not realize is it doesn't destroy the virus. It just prevents the replication of it.
Right.
So the reason why you're still sick for 3 days is whatever viral load you have when you started Tamiflu, you still have it for 2 or 3 more days
Right.
as the virus dies off. And there was also that reason that the caveat was, oh, well, if you're day 4 or 5 of influenza A, don't bother. Well, that's not true either,
Right.
because you're still stopping the replication of the virus. So even if you're day 4 or 5, there's a potential for that virus to replicate more. Just stop it. So therefore, you're going to get better in 3 or 4
Right.
days. So Tamiflu is one. The only other antiviral that I'm a real fan of is valciclovir or acyclovir, and that's for herpes zoster, which is shingles. There's also, I have 2 cases right now of younger people I'm treating with what's called herpetic whitlow. If you ever, particularly with stress, develop sores on your hand or fingers that are incredibly painful, that's actually herpetic whitlow, which is treated with valciclovir. A lot of people miss that diagnosis. And it does help with herpes type 1, the cold sores. So anyway, there you go.
I've found it. I use it for everything. I use it
No,
topically.
I'm talking about valciclovir. You know,
Yeah,
ivermectin.
right.
Ivermectin definitely plays a role. As Science reported in 2019, it does even have some anti-cancer roles. But there's a cousin to it that the literature is much stronger for.
Avermectin.
Fembrizole.
Fenbendazole.
Yeah, fenbendazole. Yeah, that is an anti-cancer.
Yes.
That is I can't recommend it enough. It doesn't interact with any chemotherapy. It does not interact with any radiation. You take a quarter of a teaspoon, basically, as you mix it up daily.
You put it.
Usually put it in food. Most people
Yeah.
do. Some people do drink.
You
Most
don't
people
put it on topically.
no, not topically, or ingest it.
Okay.
And one of the things I liked about the anecdotal literature, because there really hasn't been a formal study, is that everybody says the same thing. If it doesn't work in 3 months, it's not going to work.
Right.
And it's about a 30% failure rate, which tells me, okay, there's something real here. It's
Right.
not just snake oil.
Yes.
When shark cartilage was popular, oh, it works all the time. Well, no, it doesn't work at all. But turmeric does work. Not
Right.
for everybody, but for most people, for arthritis.
Right.
So there are certain things where if you start seeing a pattern where it may be helpful, then yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Well, it's been awesome.